actually turn it on. I've done that before where I started it and then I didn't actually switch the scene, so it was just ready to start soon for 2 hours. It didn't make any sense. Okay. CSS, who's excited? Okay, who's done CSS before? Who's kind of looked into it and used it for something? Anyone? No? Okay. Sometimes people have done that as a bit of an intro. Maybe they've done the intro course here, and so they've touched some CSS that way. So for you, CSS, the beginning is this weekend, right? Is that fair to say? Okay, cool. Good. So we're going to start at the beginning of CSS, and we're going to talk about the box model. Box model has been around for a long time, and CSS has evolved a lot since. But it's really important for us, I think, to talk about really the basis of CSS so that you can go and decide how you build on that understanding later on, whether or not you learn some new specific grid layout technology or whatever, or some new animation library or some new animation features. At the end of the day, the basis is the box model. Everything is a box, and I want to show that to you today. So I guess the way I like to say it is I'm not necessarily going to be able to teach you CSS this morning, but I'm going to show you CSS this morning. So as long as you know you do the assignments today, that's when you're going to learn more about this stuff, I hope. But I'm just going to kind of open your eyes to see this is what's available. This is maybe why some of these things are this way, that you'd have to kind of dive into some docs and find some details. So I'm going to try and share some of those things with you. Love questions and love feedback even while I'm going. So let me know. All right. This week, new project. Who likes doing these projects? Right, it's a great way to learn. And so we got another one this week. Tweeter. It's what you would expect. It's a ripoff of Twitter, right? And the whole idea here is we're going to be building a single-page application. So that means that with TinyApp, every single time you needed a new page or new feedback to the user, you would do a full request to the server. The server would go grab some data, put that into some HTML through a template, send that back to the client. Okay, you got a new page, right? So every sort of action caused a full request response where the page was reloaded. That's not what we're doing this week, and so that's so this is the different paradigm we're going to be talking about. It's that instead we're going to have an initial request response. That response is going to give us a payload of HTML and some JavaScript and some CSS, and that's our application. And so we want to take that, and the JavaScript is going to manipulate the DOM. So this is the thing that manages the structure of the page. It's going to take that, it's going to change it, and you don't even need to do a full request response to get new HTML back. You just say, this list over here, I'm going to add a new item to it. That's what we're going to be doing this week, is learning how to dynamically manipulate a browser without having to do a full reload from the server. It's week 3, so we're going to be expecting that people are spending a little bit more time in documentation before asking for help. And if what I would encourage is if there's something in documentation that you don't understand, they've written it in a way, the whole purpose is to try and help you understand, and you still don't get it, ask for a mentor to come help you read the documentation. That can be a really good way to learn maybe some documentation style or whatever it is. But don't fear the docs. Some of them are definitely worse than others. But yeah, the expectation is that you've done a little bit more research now that it's week 3. Cool? All right. I just had to get that out of the way. I was asked to. It's not. Yeah. But I actually believe it. I think that for me, the way that I learn everything these days is either from some subject matter expert doing a presentation at a conference or documentation. Because once you start to get more and more experience, there's a lot less sort of tutorials and blog posts and stuff that are really going to kind of help you. The blog posts are actually can be pretty good, but not necessarily as a way to show you the exact way to do something, but maybe as someone showing you their approach to something, and you kind of so get used to reading, I guess, right? This weekend was your introduction to HTML, and that's where it's going to sort of that's how much we give you in terms of HTML. I think the prep course maybe had some as well. I'm not going to be spending much time with it at all. It's pretty straightforward, right? I think, is there any do we have questions about HTML? Anything that kind of confuses us, or no? It's like a really good way to declare the structure of a document, I think, right? I mean, okay, maybe it's not a bad way, right? There's some things that are kind of weird about it. So I'll show you HTML if you have questions about it, but I'm not going to be focusing on any of those things really. Let me bring up the notes for today. So I posted them in the channel, so everyone should be able to follow along if you want. And then also, I'm going to be loading up this this page here. Where is it? Example index.html. What this is here, it's actually the notes for this lecture as HTML with CSS applied to it. Kind of, I like the meta kind of part of that, right? So I can show you the structure of this document. I can show you how styles are applied to it, and then after that, we're not going to be talking much more about HTML. All right. So here's that document, and the purpose of HTML, right, is to give some sort of context to the content. We have to say this content, it is a header. It's meant to represent a header. So we have to provide that context to that part of that document. And if you're using Microsoft Word or Pages or whatever, you're using Markdown. These are all ways for us to apply context to content. Plain text, you know, like just taking this stuff and not having all these tags telling us what they are. That can be a little bit hard to read and ingest, so we like to provide that context. And I think HTML here, they provide a bunch of tags that say if you wrap this content in this tag, then it represents this idea or this sort of structure. I've got, let's see, all sorts of stuff going on here. I've got ordered lists with the numbers 1 and 2, right? Ordered list here. Oops. Paragraph tags and H3s. So a header level 3, header level 2, just different levels of these headers, because a lot of times we'll provide structure to a document with sort of a hierarchy. Here's my main title, and here's some subsections, and each of those subsections have their own headers, right? This kind of looks creepy, and the reason that I have this in here is because I have a block of content that I'm trying to actually display as HTML in an HTML rendering browser, right? So this browser takes HTML and it converts it to DOM nodes that render. But this is HTML I want to display in the rendered in the document. So I need to actually represent those characters differently, because if I don't, the browser will think this is a less than. If I just put less than here, it'll just look at that and say, oh, it's just new HTML for me to parse and change into DOM nodes. So instead I have to say ampersand less than semicolon to end it off, right? Ampersand greater than semicolon. So these are ways to encode HTML entities, and there are not a lot of them, but you can encode quite a few things that way. I'm going to just HTML entities, and Google's nice enough; they give us what we need usually right away. These are the common ones here. You don't actually need to worry about much more than this. So we need to. Actually, there's the less than symbol as well. I don't know why it's not here. But the idea is that you've got greater than, less than, ampersand. The reason we have ampersand is because we start these tags with an ampersand, so we also have to escape the ampersand. It's kind of like in Unix, if I want to use like a set a new line or something like that, I do \n, and that's kind of representing this character. I've got \\/ to actually use a \. So I've got to have these encodings to use certain type of data in these documents, and that's why this looks weird. Okay, you can see here as well, x2f. This is just like a hex code that represents something that in this case I think is /, because this would be the closing tag for the head. Right? I've got an opening tag for the head. I've got a closing tag for the head. / is x2f. I just look it up. You don't need to remember this stuff. You just look it up if you need it. I don't have to do this all that often. Okay. So go back to these notes. And I've provided a little bit of a description on some of this stuff, because I've got this HTML template, and you can go and search HTML template and maybe find this exact one or one like it. This for me is the one that I tend to use. So I've got I set the language just so that maybe bots that are trying to index my page can just quickly see that it's an English page, not a French or a Spanish page or something like that. We've got we start with the head of the document, right? So we've got the head and we've got the body. So the head is going to contain information about the document, including the character set we're using. I don't have maybe a language that reads right to left. But if I did, I might have to have a character set that handled that, or Cyrillics or something like that. So I might tell the browser that. I might tell and it's not just the browser might read these things. It might also be a bot from Google that's going and looking at your page and reading this stuff. So we're not just necessarily making this work for the browser. We're also making it work for robots that index pages. I've got this meta name viewport content blah blah blah. You'll learn more about this on Friday, but this is required for this document to be sort of responsive. When I make it smaller, I want it to scale down and kind of change a little bit. In order to do that, I have to actually set up some of these scale properties. So you could just use this one for now, or leave it out. But when you get into responsive layout, then you'll want that. And we're not going to be doing that today, but I'm showing you the template I use. So that's why it's there. We put the title of the document. I'd say that is a visual element, but it's not in the body shown in the body of the document. It's shown up here in the panel of the browser. So this here, I would just copy and paste this into one of my documents, and I'd start to fill it out. All right. So any questions about that HTML stuff? No? Pretty okay. Feel good. Good. So we've got these cascading style sheets that we want to focus on today. And like I said, we're painting the DOM now. We're going to be applying properties to DOM nodes. And the weekend has DOM information in it about the DOM. Yeah, so we roughly know what it is. We're going to learn more about it over today, tomorrow. So if you don't fully get it, please ask me questions. But I'm going to continue to reference it. So we've got some element in the DOM, and I want to apply that its background color is a certain way, that it's that the text is of a certain color and a certain size. I just apply these properties to that node, and those properties will tell the browser how to sort of render that content. And so they're called cascading style sheets. And I kind of just ruined it there because I haven't done this in a little while. We've got something else that cascades, right? Out there in nature. It's these things, waterfalls. Does anybody not understand how a waterfall cascades? We've got these different levels maybe, and the water hits one and then bounces off and hits down, and the water that's at the end is sort of the water that started at the top. CSS can work that way as well. If I apply a style to something at the top of my DOM and I don't overwrite it later on, then those child nodes will also have sort of that same style down the line. So it looks like this, right? I apply a color property to HTML. Color property changes the text of the content. Body doesn't set that. Div doesn't set that. Paragraph doesn't set that. The content text here is just going to be the color of whatever it was in HTML, right? So we don't have to apply these properties to absolutely everything, because if we did, that would actually be pretty difficult. That's a nightmare to manage that, right? So this is a sort of don't repeat yourself style within cascading style sheets, or within style sheets at least. It's kind of my example here, what it looks like. So HTML, I'll apply a couple properties to it. Medium aquamarine and floral white. Those colors, or I guess, yeah, so then within the HTML there's a body. That body, I can apply properties to that, and anything that I don't apply to that specifically could come from the parent. In this case, I've given it a border. I've given the body a border. Later on, within the body, there's a div element. That div element, I decide to overwrite both the background color and the foreground color, and we can see how that would be applied. The div has a different color there. But then the div has its own child, a p tag, right? This is what it looks like. And that p tag, it overwrites the color again back to floral white. So we go from floral white to orange, back to floral white. Right. Any questions about that? Whoa, that's broken. Well, kind of. What happened here? I don't remember that being... Whatever, it doesn't matter. It just threw me off a little bit. So in CSS, everything is a box, and I'm going to show you this within the browser. I've got this cool kind of thing I learned from when I do these lectures. I watch the previous ones people that had recorded, and so I saw this trick. I think, I'm not sure if it was Don maybe. Maybe it was David. But either way, I thought it was pretty cool to show this because I never really thought about how to teach that before. I'd kind of just, I don't know, how do we learn CSS? You just try things and see what works and what doesn't, and then when it works, you stop touching it, I guess. And it's a lot of guessing and testing, kind of. So I didn't really think about the concepts behind it. I wasn't taught it that way. But then when I started to try and learn it more formally to be able to teach you, this was one of the examples, and I thought it made it a little bit better. So I've got this document, and in this document, I've got styles applied. I'm going to remove those styles. So the way that I've applied the styles here, I actually have these link tags. And what they do is they bring in a style sheet from external and apply it to this document. If I comment out the styles and I reload the page, I get no style applied. This is all just my content. The context is there, but it's not really highlighted because none of the stuff is really different, right? We do have a couple of new lines, but there's no headers, there's no code blocks, there's none of that. I've removed the styles here. Let's take this code that I've copied from over here, which is just, here, I'll explain it to you quickly. We're going to learn more about this stuff tomorrow because it's JavaScript in the browser. So what I need to do is create a new element called style. I'm doing that dynamically. When I create that style, I then grab the head element, the head tag, and I append the style to that. So what I'm doing is programmatically adding a style to this document. But I'm doing it with JavaScript. The reason why is because I kind of want to do it dynamically. But if I could also take this style here and apply it right in here to my style tag. Say so. When I do that, we're going to see that everything here, everything has a red outline. It's because I gave everything a red outline. I've got this star, I guess, what's a good way? Selector. It's a wildcard selector. It means grab everything. So I grab everything and I give it an outline that's a solid 1 pixel red line. And that outline is going to show us that, yeah, sure enough, everything is a box in here. Right? Everything can be, doesn't matter if it has round corners. It's still a box. Right? Yes. So the question, is will the star override everything else? Yes. So the way that styles are applied, and we will talk about this more, is that it does matter on the order of these things. So if I were to set up an outline of something inside this other document, I was trying to outline something there, and then later on I do star outline, then that thing would get a red outline instead of a green or a blue one if that's what it had before. Yeah. The order is going to matter for that, and there's a few other things that we're going to learn. Chooses which styles get applied, because you can apply the same styles, the same property over and over to an element, but only one can actually be rendered, so we have to have different ways to decide what that is. So we'll talk about specificity this afternoon, more so, but for now, just let's think about it in terms of if it comes, if whatever is the last style, or the last style to apply that property is going to take effect. Okay. So everything's a box. I'm going to take this back and turn the styles back on and see, okay, this is actually a little bit easier to see that. Before everything was stretched across the entire window. Now we've got a bit of that structure. My source code link is a box. My navigation bar at the top is a box. My header, everything is a box. All boxes. Embedded code into this line here, it's a box. Box, 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 everything. So everything's a box. That means we need to think about how do we actually change the way these boxes look. So the first thing is we add content into them. The content is going to help us determine how big, the browser, how big to render this box. If the content is 200 pixels by 100 pixels, then the box that it's going to render by default is going to be that same size. And we can change the size of that box by adding new properties to it, including, for example, padding. We can say, well, we don't want the content to be right to the edges. We want a little bit of padding around the edges to give ourselves some space. So that padding is going to increase the overall size of that box. We can add more to it by adding a border. We add a 1 pixel border, we add essentially 2 pixels to the width and 2 pixels to the height. If we add a 50 pixel border, we add 100 pixels to the width and 100 pixels to the height. So we can manipulate the size of a box. The content, we'll set it first, but we can change it with the padding, and we can also alter it with the border. And then on the outside of a box, we've got this idea of a margin. It pushes other elements away from it, give you space on the outside of the border. And so that's kind of what it looks like. Content, initial size, padding alters, border could alter, and then margin gives you space around. So we apply these properties. It's pretty clear how we're applying these properties. Just have this selector, nav. So I want to change the nav, whatever the nav tag is, whatever the nav tag element is. And I'm going to give the nav some padding. I'm going to give padding to the top, the bottom, the left, and the right. And I can be very verbose about it. You can see that. But there's also shorthand. If I just want to give it 100 pixels around the whole thing, then my bottom, the stuff on the bottom here, nav padding 100, will do that for me. So as we define these properties, there's the sort of single value, but you'll also see as you're going through CSS or writing it yourself that we can use these multi-value. And so if I wanted to have something that actually had a different width and a different height, I could do it the way that's on the top, where I'm, again, verbose about it. I just call out the top, the left, the right, the bottom. Or I do the shorthand, and now we can see that it's actually 100 pixels tall and 200 pixels, or I guess on the height, and 200 pixels on the width. So it's going top, bottom, and then left, right. Now, I can actually do 3 as well. And this is, just for completeness, I think, this is kind of something, I mean, it's possible you do this. But for the most part, I think in this case, you'd probably start out just writing the padding top, padding bottom. I don't know. I guess, yes, this is kind of weird to see. I don't see it often, but it still works. So 100 pixels on the top. You're going to get 200 on the left and right, and then 300 on the bottom. And I don't know why it's like that. I mean, they had to just choose one way to do it, right? This is a bit more common, where we actually want to apply it to all of them maybe differently like that. If that's the case, we're going to go in this order, right? So what is this order? It's like, yeah, let's say starting from the top, we go, or I guess clockwise. But starting from the top, that's probably an important distinction. So clockwise starting from the top. Okay. What about top, right, bottom, left? And if you want to remember that, we've got a acronym for it, right? It's just the way that it is, so it's just something we have to learn and know. Top, right, bottom, left. And just if you're doing your CSS today, you're all going to be probably doing a little bit of this, right? Just kind of trying to think about it and get it, yeah. But use the shorthand if you can, because it definitely saves time as you start to write more and more of this stuff. And you also want to be able to recognize it when you actually look at someone else's CSS, right? All right, where are we for time? Oh, ripping. Okay, maybe I'll slow down a little. Well, we got these 2 types of elements initially in CSS. There's definitely more now, but we're going to focus on these 2. So when CSS started, we have block level elements and inline elements. And this is actually a property you can change. It's the display property. You can say that this element, H1, has a display property of block, and then that would make it a block level element. But by default, it is already a block level element. But you can change the display property. You can make an H1 an inline element by just setting its display property to inline. The major difference between them is that block level elements are for sort of vertical stacking of elements, whereas inline is if I want something to actually be horizontally flowed. Okay. So a block level, these are a big list of block level elements. Divs, H1s I've highlighted, list items, paragraphs, unordered lists. A block level element will start at the left side and take up if it can, the entire width of the browser, and if it cannot, then the next element in the list would drop down to the next side either way. So block elements are never going to stack horizontally. We're never going to be able to see them beside each other like that. So this is what it looks like. This paragraph is actually just a block level element. It's taking up the entire width of the screen. We saw that here when I got rid of the styles. All these block level elements, they're just trying to take up as much space as they can. We can see the red line across, right? So block level element, yeah, it tries to take the whole width. We got these inline elements. So if I want to have something inline, like in these cases we got buttons and images, we can do that. When I make two buttons side by side, I should make them. I mean, they're inline elements, so they will sit next to each other. If I wanted to have buttons stacked, I might have to make them block level elements, so that they actually take up the whole width of that screen and push the next element down. This is kind of what it looks like. If I want to, I can have style applied to an element inline like this by using an inline element like a span. So a div and a span, those are kind of our generic, I guess, maybe like, not necessarily primitives, but they're like our generic containers. And the main difference between the div and the span is that the div is a block level element and the span is an inline element. So tend to use the span when you want to maybe take a little bit of text out of a paragraph and then change some of its properties, like the background color here that I've done. If I were to do that with a block level element, this is what we would get instead. Because that thing that's a block level element just tries to take up the entire width of the browser that it can, whatever space it can inside of its containing element. So this we need to learn. It means we don't ever put a block level element inside of an inline element. We only ever put either block level elements inside other block level elements, or inline elements into those block level elements. But this is the no-no. So just, I don't know why I would ever do this, so it's okay that we don't do it. I've never needed to, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. So the third thing that came around shortly, a little bit later, because we wanted to, another big difference between the block line and the inline elements is really how the ability to, what is it? The size of it based on the content. That there are differences there, and so sometimes we want to actually have an element that will sit in line of some text, but will actually take on width and height properties or the changes in the size that with padding and all that. So in that case, we have this inline block thing, and I'm just sorry that there's this third thing that uses both those words. You could use this today. It's not very common. At the end of the day, the message is we use Flexbox a lot more these days, and we use newer CSS technologies. So this is more of a history lesson than anything, and you're going to be forced to do this for today. You're going to have to be forced to use this older technology for today. But I encourage everyone, and I will continue to do it, to after, for the midterm or whatever, learn a little bit about Flexbox, try and learn some of these newer technologies as well. But yeah, so here's the thing about the inline block. You've already read it, I'm sure. If not, I'll leave it up for another second. Okay. So who wants to volunteer? How big is this box? Yeah, anyone? 100 by 100. Okay. Anyone else? 100 by 100. 130 by 130. Okay, so the first answer. Sorry, what's your name? Okay, so you're saying that we've set the width and the height to 100 by 100, so that's what the size of the box should be, right? Do you want to change your answer? Okay, so we're going to change the answer now because we've got the padding that goes around. And the border as well, so we're saying 130, right? Okay. But think about it, because it's actually on both sides. So this box is 160 by 160, right? All right. So it's 160 by 160, and what that's telling us is that we've actually we're seeing some new properties here, width and height, and we're saying that the width and height of the blue area is going to be 100 by 100, and then we're going to add 20 around the whole thing, which is going to give us 40 on the top and bottom, 40 on the left, or the left and right. And we're going to add a border outside of that. It's going to be another 10 pixels on either side. So yeah, 160. Now, I can change that behavior. I can make it act different. I can actually say, hey browser, when I say width 100 and height 100, I mean it. I actually mean that. I don't care what the padding is. I don't care what the border is. You fit that all into my 100 by 100, and the way we do that is by changing the box sizing property. Okay? So by default, your box sizing will be content box, and it will work this way. But when you change the property here, box sizing to border box, it's going to act a little different. You're going to say, I actually want this thing to be 100 by 100, padding you fit inside, border you fit inside. Okay. So I don't want to actually apply that to every single element though, right? So what I would expect to see, or for you to do, this thing here that I was using to outline actually everything, I could also use it to say, that everything now has box sizing border box. And if I do that, then everything is going to, well, I think stay the same, because I believe that I went in here and did, maybe not. Yeah, I don't know where. Probably not. Probably wasn't applied before. I don't think it seems to matter. Yeah. So that's how we'd apply it to everything. And I recommend doing this for Tweeter. I recommend doing it for your midterm. This is how I do my stuff. Is I use box sizing border box, because for me it's just easier to think about it that way. Is that I'm not thinking about the padding and all that other stuff as extras. I'm thinking about this box that I have here. I want it to be 100 by 100, and we're not necessarily doing that. Like, we want to try and avoid setting the absolute sizes of things, because that can be dangerous for responsive design. But there are times we do it, and when we do it, I want it to have this behavior. Yes. Is it just a
size of your image is 100 by 100, but you have like your 20 for the padding and your 10 for the border, so just that ratio to within that 100 by 100, that things are just kind of.
Yeah, there's no real ratio that's applied. It's the content that's going to be lost as a result of that. The content is going to be clipped as a result of you changing that size and not being able to fit everything in there. You're going to set the padding to 10 by 10. It's still going to be 10. It's not going to go down to like 60% of that if it doesn't. Yeah. So you have to still sometimes do that calculation in your head and say, yeah, I want to add this much padding around this image. My image is 64 pixels. I now add this padding around it, and you just add up, and then that's your width and height. I think that's a little bit better way to think about it, but yeah, content will get clipped when you use width and height if it doesn't fit. But then don't use width and height, I guess. Yeah. If you want the content just to, and you can use one or the other. So I could say just the height is this, and then the width can just grow, or I can say just the width is this much and the height will grow. But if I set both, then it's going to clip the content in some way. And you can also then, nowadays we got newer properties like overflow, and we can say we want to overflow this content auto, and it'll give us a little scroll bar right in just that little element there, which can be annoying for some people, right? But sometimes we want to do that. Let's say we have two divs beside, or two elements beside each other. One is a list of users in a chat, or a list of channels, let's say. One is actually the chat window here. That's actually not a bad way to do this type of behavior, where you actually just say this thing, everything inside of it just gets clipped. If it doesn't have space, but that's okay, because we have a scroll bar, so we can just scroll to it, right? All right, so we've talked about the box sizing. We'll use border box from now on. Um, normalize.css. So this is actually a very specific implementation of this concept. The concept is CSS resets. So I didn't talk about this earlier. Before I load my styles, I load something called reset.css. And reset.css came from this location here. This is just a chunk of CSS someone wrote to try and reset, we'll call them the user agent style sheets. Haven't brought this up, and that's actually kind of a mistake. I probably should have brought this up a long time ago. This tool here. All right. This is where when I'm doing CSS, this is where I live. Because this allows me to sort of, let's see, find an element, like a header like this, and I can say, that's a little too big. I can just change it, right? And I can see the effect of that change immediately in the browser. This instant feedback is a UI developer's, that's the process. You don't get away from that anymore. Used to be, yeah, make a change, save, go over, reload. That's not good enough anymore. Nowadays, we want to see instant feedback. So I use this tool to do that. And we're gonna, as we do that, we can see that the styles on this H1, they don't end at the font size here. We've also got, in my style CSS, applied the font family and the line height and all of this. We've applied a margin here. And if we look down, there were other styles that tried to be applied as well from reset.css. And so reset is a way for us to actually modify the user agent style sheet, which is the default browser properties. Every browser could potentially say that an H1 is slightly different with the default styles. What they can't do is when you try and apply the color blue, make that blue a green. They can't do that. But what they can do is say, for the basic rules here, the basic styles, all of our tags that we support in the browser, if no one applies any styles to these things, which is, that's me right now, and I go back in here, it's got to look like something though, right? So this actually still has really nice, I'd say really nice structure to it. I can read this really easily. It's not pretty, but it's practical from a reading standpoint. This is what the old web used to look like all over the place, right? So it does have this structure still, and the way that it has this structure or the style to it is because all these tags still have styles, and they're applied by the user agent style sheet. But the problem is let's say Chrome and Firefox have slightly different user agent style sheets. Then when I try and overwrite one or two properties, maybe there's still a difference between those two layouts, and I have to overwrite every single one of those properties to take control back of that CSS. What we do instead is we just use something like a reset here, where it goes through and it just applies the same sort of properties, base properties, to all these elements. And so if you're loading in Firefox, you're loading in Chrome or Edge, at the very base level, it'll look the same, and then you build on top of the reset. Okay, so this is called a reset, but there's also this idea of a normalize, and normalization is just about trying to make things the same across the board, and that's the same thing. It's just that we want to make sure all these browsers' base styles, they all work the same, so we're going to overwrite them in the same way, and you're going to use that as the basis for all of your styles. So I recommend using reset.css or normalize.css. What I don't recommend doing is loading up only Chrome, building up an entire website, and then loading it in a Firefox and saying that 12% of your market or whatever is not seeing what you expected them to see. So I'm not necessarily saying test in both browsers often, which you should, but if you start with this, at least from all of our experience, we know that this gets you into a good starting point. Okay. Normalized CSS will come from just their site. And if I click download, it really is just a chunk of CSS that I can copy and I can paste it into my own file. I can make this my reset now. Good. Now I'm using normalize, right? Shouldn't look any different. Oh. Okay. And so this is what that looks like. If I don't apply the styles, we get this. Oh. Well, actually, reset is a little slightly different. We're seeing that the normalize is definitely different than the reset. The reset is like a pure, like nothing. You don't have anything. Whereas the normalize is, no, we're just going to make it so that the H1 in Chrome and the H1 in Firefox both have the same size, same font, same margin. So normalize is about making things all the same, whereas reset is actually about taking them all basically to 0. But both approaches work well for me. I find that I could use either of these and still, I tend to overwrite so many of the CSS anyways that it doesn't tend to matter. But you can see here that that reset is being applied. I can turn it on and off, get my styles back. That's the difference, right? Cool. Happy? A little too much, I think? Yeah, why not? All right, I got to talk to you about floats now. And so I think we should take a break and then come back to floats because it's a big topic. Okay. Thanks. I guess we'll start again. Start back up. I gotta teach about floats. Does anybody know what floats are? What the float property does? No, I'm gonna show you, and then we're gonna use it a little bit, and then you'll never use it the rest of your career. Um, well, maybe you will. I don't know. Maybe you're working on some older WordPress theme or something like that. This is just an old technique that was used because I want to show you how we go from scientific documents to application layouts, because that's how the web transitioned, right? The original purpose of the internet was to transfer documents between scientific establishments, and so those documents didn't have they were what you'd expect for documents. You have headers and you have paragraphs and you have images. Oh, images were actually pretty fancy. That wasn't from the beginning, but let's say you do have these images now, and you have this text, and you want to like a book or something, a newspaper. You want to have the text flow around the image so that you don't just have paragraph, image, but instead you have a layout more like what we have on the left there, where that text just flows around the image nicely. There's one on the right as well. It flows around that, and it just kind of flows down the document between the images, right? These elements, the green and the orange elements, have been that we've applied a property called float. If we want that to happen in CSS, we apply a float property. Okay. So originally that's what float was for, is being able to have a little bit more interesting documents with images inline to text there. But that's not how it ended. We started building web applications, and web applications require layouts, and layouts tend to have a different sort of a structure that documents have. Take a look at the right. That's sort of a common web layout. You have this big header. Maybe we call it the hero panel or something like that. Maybe it's a big image, your company's tagline. Maybe it's a video that plays in the background. Maybe it's a video that introduces the product. It doesn't really matter. It's this massive header thing. And then below that we have this another section where we have maybe information about the product, the top 3 things about the product, or testimonials from those that have used it or whatever. But the key here, it's a column-based layout. We're actually going 3 columns for that content. And that's actually, well, until a couple years ago, was very hard to do on the web. We really hacked at the web to make that work. And then you build things like Bootstrap to wrap all that up in a nicer bundle, because all the ugliness underneath is this float stuff I got to show you. So the whole idea here is we're trying to transition from document style layout to document styles to the more application style, and the only technique we had at the time was to use floats. Let's show you. I'll show you what that looks like, or how a float works at least, because that's this afternoon I will be showing you more about how to do grid-based layouts with floats. This morning I just want to show you how the float works and then how we actually hacked it to make it do what we wanted. So, not hacked it, but like used it sort of for not really for its purpose. Maybe that is hacking. Who knows, right? Blockfloat.html is what the example will look like at the end. Kind of drops down. That's kind of nice, right? That's looking a little responsive on the top there. So let's start off with this document here. I'm going to get rid of all of the boxes that I put in before. I'll just have the one. That's a float box. Right now we'll just make it a box. And I'm going to get rid of a bunch of these styles here, except all the way up to here. So what we're starting with, we've got, we use that box sizing border box just to keep ourselves sane. Body, we'll set the font in there. It makes sense. The whole body has the same font, so I would just put it in there. Got the background color and the font size. Background color is going to be for the entire document again, so that's why we're putting it in here. Font size, the whole document's going to have that, or the whole body of the document. And then we've got this div, and this div is just this idea of something that has a 6-pixel border and the text content is off-white. The div with a box tag, so all divs are going to have this outline. Let's say I don't give this a, this is what we start with, is a box that has the width and height sort of determined by the fact that it's a block level element and its content. We've got a border around it, but we're not applying this style yet, and so in order to do that, we see that this is actually a div element with a box class. Okay, so now this is a div element with a box class that's called box. You kind of see how I said that? Actually, that's interesting. So here, it said here, this is a div element with a class box. So that's what it's looking for, right? It's looking for div elements, and when it finds div elements, it's trying to filter out the ones that have the class box, and it'll apply that to it. So we need to make sure that it falls in line with that. Okay. Now we can see why it's 200 by 200 or whatever the pixel size is. It's no longer taking the entire width, but we've sort of hindered it. And I'm going to bring up this panel thing here and show you, oh, okay. It's still a block level element. It's still taking up the entire width of the browser, right? How does it take up the rest of the width of its browser? What's that orange on the side there? Yeah, the margin, yeah. So it's a block level element. It doesn't take up the entire width of the browser, so therefore it's going to have an auto margin that just does, so the next element that we add is going to drop down, right? We'll take this. 2 elements stacked on top of each other. Both of them are block level elements. Therefore, they both take up the entire width of the browser there. Okay. And the problem we're trying to solve, though, is that we want these boxes, which could I say that this box here has a display of inline? If I want to make them columns instead of stacked like that? What happened? Like what did we lose? Yeah, we lost exactly the height and the width, and that's because it's an inline element. And an inline element isn't just inline, but it also doesn't care about the width and the height. So, like, okay, well, we've got block elements and inline elements. How do we make these how do we make horizontal layouts that we want? And this is where floats come in. So, if I make an element display block and I say that it has a float of left, do that. Div, float. I'm only prefixing these classes just to try and make it a little bit more clear, but in practice I don't tend to actually prefix all of my classes with the tag that it's supposed to be, because that doesn't allow me to share them between different types of tags. I'm just trying to be explicit here, so don't, yeah, maybe I should. Maybe I should actually do it the way I would do it as an example. But here I'm going to say that anything that I give the class float will float to the left. And so we end up is something more like this now, where we got the sizing is being applied because it's still a block element. We didn't change that, but we actually applied this float behavior, which is actually meant to be for flowing text around an image. Everything looks good, right? I get both. I get what I want. I get columns that I can set the height of. So I add a few more of these, and it's like, great. My site's working. This is actually a lot easier than I thought it was, right? Okay. Well, now I want something. And this thing here that I want is other content. Well, that's not working, right? So now I've run into my problem. It worked up until I tried to add some other element after the fact. And it's showing us, well, other content wants to be at the top, and so do all our boxes. And they're all block level elements, but we've floated some of them above, meaning, well, that other stuff that's actually in, let's say, the natural flow of the document, the natural layout of the document, other content, for example, it's just going to go where it thinks it can go, which is underneath the floating stuff. So we need a way to say, well, we've got these boxes here. We want afterwards, we want to stop floats. We want to stop this stuff from floating, and everything after that will just go back into the natural flow of the document, but after the boxes, right? When I say natural flow of the document, I mean like this layout thing tries to put things into a good spot. So there is sort of a natural flow. Once we change some of these properties like float, that natural flow is altered. So Another thing that changes the natural flow of a document, absolute positioning of things, which we'll get into this afternoon. Okay, so I want this div to actually be down here below my boxes. I'm going to start off by creating a div with a class clear. And I'm going to make that class up here. And clear is it's a property, it's actually a value of the float property. So here we're saying, oh, actually, no, sorry. I don't do this very often, so it's a weird thing. It's just a weird old thing. I thought it's not float clear. I want to clear the float. I want to clear the left float. Okay. So that's what I'm saying here. If I had something floating to the right, which is actually a way I can get stuff to move over to the other side of the document, then I would clear right. And if I had both left and right, I'd probably clear both. So those are the three properties here. I can do left, right, or both to clear either the left, the right, or both types of floats. And so now I kind of get that behavior that I wanted, right? Which is the other content actually comes afterwards, but then this is kind of ugly here. So what I would do, I don't want this to have this border, but it's a div and it has that border. So I can empty it out. I mean, I could just empty it out and get rid of the border, maybe overwrite the border, say border 0 up here. And now it kind of looks like that thing doesn't even exist. We can see it's here. I mean, it is here, but it has a 0 height. So that kind of gets us closer, right? But we don't stop there because we're not happy with that. That's not I don't like adding elements in my document just for stuff like this. It's kind of a weird thing to do, to add sort of these empty elements just to move and position things and tell things to act a different way. So we've actually got this other option, which is called the clear fix. And I have, well, a link here. Oh, they changed the layout. Nice. So if you want to read more about this, I definitely recommend this site for CSS specifically. So CSS Tricks, incredible resource for CSS. It's been around for a long time, and they've got tons of old articles, tons of new stuff. And we can see here that they actually care enough to actually update some of this stuff, which is cool, right? Like, how often do you see that? Not very often. Usually it's like, when was this post written? 2015. Great. But that's it. That's where it ended. So keep that in mind if as you're learning CSS. This is a great site for it. And it talks about print layout versus web layout and how we're using floats to create these layouts. I mean, I didn't make this stuff up. This is stuff that just exists, right? So talks about clearing the float to try and solve this problem. But I'm going to look for CSS Tricks Clear Fix. And so if I go to this one here, oh, look at them. They're on fire. It's great. Maybe they just update that. Who knows? Maybe they don't actually change anything. So here's some CSS that a number of experts in this field have decided is the optimal way, meaning most support and least amount of code, to get this behavior. And the way that I would, what's happening here is all this stuff, those boxes, what we'd do is we'd wrap them in a container, and that container we'll use a pseudo element called after and apply that clear to it. So we don't need to know the details of all of that. We learn about the clear fix, and then once we have the clear fix, we apply it. So let's just skip to applying it here. Instead of just dropping and having this empty element, I'm going to take my boxes, and I'm going to put these boxes into a row class, a row element here. So I've actually started to kind of create this structure of my document of rows and columns. I'm just calling boxes, I'm calling columns boxes right now. But now I've just created a grid layout, right? Kind of, right? I've got this idea of a row, column, column, column. I want another row. I drop it down. Want another row? I can grab another row and just pop it down there. So every row in the document might have another, and I could have 2 columns in it if I wanted to, right? So So I've got this row. The row is going to be my container. That means I can apply this clear fix to the row, because it's the thing that holds all of my floated boxes, right? So I grab this, and I say div dot row after blah blah blah. You know, I said I wasn't going to do that anymore, so all rows after. Oops. Where did I go? There it is. Oh, what did I do? Is clear gone? Oh, I got rid of clear. That was my problem. I want to keep my other clear because it's for my previous example. That's better. Okay, that's what I expected. So now, this container that I have here, this row, it's added this little element down here, this pseudo element after. So after all of the content that is in that container, apply these properties, including the clear fix. Sounds good to me, right? So this just shows you that even without a custom solution for this problem of I wanting to create both layouts that can go vertical and horizontal, so grid-based layouts, we have this feature that we can use. It's not great for it, but it works. And then we have to learn how to make it work in all situations, which is let's apply a clear fix to it. Right? I think that this this will probably teach you more in detail. This was where I learned about these things. So I definitely recommend CSS Tricks. Okay. So we've got that kind of going. Let me show you a few more ways we can do the same type of thing. And again, it's just sort of stuff that was added to CSS. Post float. One of the things is let's get rid of this. Okay, so I'm going to make this box down here inline. So it's going to look kind of, actually I'll make a couple of them. Oops. There we go. Okay, so I got a couple of these boxes now. None of them are floating, none of them are within, none of them are floating, so they're all stacked vertically because they're block level elements. I want to take this thing inline, and the property I want to apply is actually display inline block. Yeah. So that was that third one that I talked to you about, and this was kind of added after to try and solve that problem of like, well, you don't care about the size when I set the width and height, but you also don't, but you stack horizontally. I want both those things. Just inline block gives us both those things, right? So we could use that as well. Another option is here, this row. The clear fix used to be the best solution, and again, when we say the optimal solution, it's because older browsers support it. But then newer browsers maybe support newer properties, so as those older browsers become out of use, the clear fix becomes less useful to us. We could start to use some of these other ideas like, well, like the inline block one, or here, I think it's this. Oops. No, what was it? I forget. It's like, it's not I use Flexbox, so it's kind of hard to, let me grab my notes here quickly. I had, yeah, overflow auto. Why is that not? Oh, I see why. Because I forgot to take off this pseudo element. I want actually the entire row to have this property, not just the, I don't want to kind of add it as like a pseudo element. It's kind of like this not real or virtual element that it, unfortunately, there's a lot of topics that I won't be able to get to today, including pseudo elements and pseudo classes. But I did link to documentation on these things. So here I say my row has an overflow property of auto, and if I do that, I get that same kind of behavior in here. So we've got clear fix, row overflow auto, we've got inline block, and then nowadays I recommend using Flexbox. So obviously lots of different ways to do the same thing to the user, pretty much looks the same. To us, that's where it matters. The older ways to do it are always going to be more complicated. We're going to have to think about more things and keep more things in sync and maintain more things. But as we've moved on, that becomes less of a problem, and we just start to use newer technologies. And so a lot of this comes down to who's your target audience? Do they still use Internet Explorer 9? Probably not. 11, if it's a government, maybe. But after that, we're starting to get to the point where a lot of these things won't matter. I can't imagine we'll be teaching floats for much longer. Bootstrap, for example, their big change from version 3 to version 4 was switching everything from this older style, the floats and all that, to Flexbox instead, because they believe that Flexbox is supported well enough that Bootstrap 4 can use it. And that, to me, is enough for me to use it everywhere, right? All right. So float, 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 and clear. Use that for tweeter, and I think it makes sense. So any questions about this stuff? So definitely, I'm not sure how I finished so early, because it usually takes me 2 hours to get through that stuff. I'm not sure what's going on. I actually went through my notes and looked, what did I miss? And I feel like I didn't really talk much about the syntax in detail, so maybe that's where I saved some time. We want to talk about the syntax. Okay. Yeah, let's do that. Why not, right? So I kind of glazed over it, but this is the structure within when we define CSS. And the selector list, it's not just a selector, it's called a selector list because we can actually put more than one selector. You would, if you look at my styles here in styles.css, I did that here. I said, well, I mean, all of my headers are going to have the same font. All of them are going to have, let's give them all the same margin. Maybe this doesn't make sense now that I think about it. But at the end of the day, I can apply the same styles to a bunch of tags, and then I can overwrite those, or even just apply then specific styles to each of those tags. So you're seeing here, all these headers get some styles or properties, and then H1, H2, H3, I've actually set the font size, which is what I cared about being different between them. Here I've got both pre-tags, which is sort of a way to say, I think, pre-formatted. So when I want to show code in the browser, I use this pre-tag. And then, but a pre-tag is a block level element. I also wanted to have some code inline. So this is all coming from this document here. You can see that I also had code inline somewhere here, for example. It's not really code, it's just a different, I mean, it's a font. I wanted to use a monospace font inline here. So I had to apply the same styles, the font and the weight, to these two types of items. What else? Yeah, here we go. Ordered lists and unordered lists have these properties. So it's kind of nice. We can have that shorthand and reduce the amount of actual code we had to write. I guess alternatively what you're doing is you're saying I've got a div that has a color black and a paragraph that has a color black. Obviously that can get out of control. Okay. So any questions about these? People good with hex numbers for colors? FFF? Yes? No? No? Do we know how where this comes from? Like how we can take a color and then convert it to basically essentially a random looking string that still represents that color? Let's see. Here's one, right? If I wanted to break this color down into its red, green, and blue elements, I could do that. The red element is actually represented by the value 15. The green element is represented by the value 27, and the blue element is represented by the value 27. Okay. So let's say I take this color here. Sure, why not? All right, and I think Photoshop lets me paste a paste a new, like a hex value for a color. I'm pretty sure they're good with that. So I just got to find the colors here. Oh, maybe they don't. Okay, sketch. Try sketch out. That was so much easier. That's kind of why I don't use Photoshop much anymore. So I got this color here, this fill, and I'm going to take that color, paste it in there, and we're going to see. This is that color. It's that background. So it's that dark background that I've been using. It's got like a slight bluish kind of teal color to it. I kind of like it. So let's take that and say, well, if red is 15 and green is 27 and blue is 27, I'm going to duplicate that. And I'm going to go in instead and say red is 20, or sorry, what did I say, 15? 15, 27, 27. Well, I wanted this to be a bit more clear that these are not the same color, but they're not the same color, right? Okay. And the reason they're not the same color is because this value 15 is not in base 10. It's in base 16, which is hexadecimal. So I'm going to take this value here and convert decimal, or sorry, hexadecimal to decimal. I don't know if any of these are good. It doesn't really matter. My hex number is 15. I convert it, and my decimal number is 21. Okay. Take that. Oops, it's not Photoshop anymore. Go into Sketch. And so I'm going to make my red color, instead of 15, I'm going to make it 21. And I go over, and I take 27. That's 39, so I take that. Not there, down here. Oops. And we'll do it for blue as well. And when I do that, now they're the same color, right? So that's why we see characters in these. Is because, sure, in base 10 we have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. But then after that, in order to represent the next value, we have to use the digits 1 and 0, and that doesn't fit. So we use A, and then B, and then C, and then D, and then E, and then F. That's the end of it. And those actually represent 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Right? So hexadecimal is a base 16 encode, allows us to do a base 16 encoding of the red, green, and blue elements of a color. In my editor here, I don't know when it'll show up, but come on, where are you? Why is it not? Oh, there was. Okay, there it is. So I'm gonna have to zoom out just a little bit to show you this. Here's my, my editor gives me this color picker. If I click up top here, it's actually automatically converting these to, well, HSL. It's a different way to represent color. Hue, saturation, luminance. I'm not going to even get into that. RGB. Oh, that now looks like the values that we converted. Right? Or I'll just stick with hex for that. So any questions about? Okay, cool. Yeah, just another thing. Let's see. And I don't know.
Sorry, how do you represent like higher numbers than 15 with a?
Oh, I see what you're saying. So, yeah. How do I represent higher numbers than 15? No. Oh, you're actually taking those two digits. So, here, 1 and 5. This is actually 1 times 16 plus 5, right? And so it would be, if this was like a 1, it would be 10. Sorry. Yeah, I think 10. Here, let's do it this way. I'll give you an example. I love finding good resources first, but these are all actually converters. We don't want to actually. I want like a diagram of it stepping through that process. Okay. That's kind of what it might look like, right? Yeah, that's kind of right. So here, this is the value. C represents value 12. A is 10, 11, 12. 12 is C. Times 16 to the power of 0. So it's really just 12 at that digit, right? So let's worry about this from only two digits, because that's really our limit is 255 for colors. We won't go above that. So that means that we can represent any of those elements as two characters. Here 9C would be 9 times 16 to the power of 1 plus C, which is 12. And that would give us our 156, right? That would be the actual decimal color that we'd use. So if we go back to my example here, we had 15 and 27 and 27. 15 is actually 1 times 16 plus 5. Which is going to give us that 21. The next one is going to be 2 times 16 plus 7. And that's going to give us 32 plus 9, sorry, 32 plus 7, so 39. And the next one is like that. So if we add these characters in here now, and we say that we actually have like E6, E6, E6 is kind of like an off-white color. We're going to say E, its value is 15. So 15 times 16 plus 6, times 16. Actually, and then, of course, 240. 240 plus 6, we're going to get 246 for this. So this color would be red is 246, green is 246, blue is 246. It's like an off-white, slight gray. So we don't need to worry about anything higher than like 2-digit hexadecimal for colors like this. And I don't recommend necessarily doing this conversion yourself, but that's how we get here. Is that we figure out what position it's in, multiply it by 16 to the power of that position to send our. Make sense? Okay, cool. Thanks for asking this. Anything else? Okay. I don't think I do either. Just make sure. So we went to the syntax. Oh, here's a quick one. Give me 2 ways that I can apply styles to a document. Start with 1 though. Yeah. Inline. So when you say inline, you mean?
You include a style tag.
Cool. Yeah, so that's actually, so including a style tag inside the tag itself is actually not something I even went over. So what that would look like is, and then I give it a string, and the string would be like background, color, blue, semicolon, color, red, semicolon kind of thing. So I could do this sort of an approach to applying styles directly to this element. It is a way we do it, or it's a way we can do it. I would say that if you find yourself doing it this way, there is a lot of negative things to doing it this way. Is that we're not sharing anything, and styles are at their best when we're writing a minimal amount of styles and applying them to a bunch of different things, composing them together. So we can do this, and we do it in some situations. I'd say it's our third best option, though. What's another way? Yeah.
Linking a style sheet in the header.
That's right. So we link the style sheet in the header. It looks like this. We use a link tag. It has an href, just like an a tag does. And I don't know what rel actually means. Like, yeah, something like that maybe. Yeah. But I don't know. I just put that in there every time. I never really paid much attention. So this is a really good way to do it. This is probably the #1 way to do this, because we get to maybe import a few different files. And what I've done here is I've actually named them kind of based on what's in them. If I just had one file, I'd have my resets, and then I'd have my styles, and then I'd have it all in one file. It's harder to manage that way. So I like breaking it up into different files and using the link to import. What's another way? There's a third common way. It's just like this, right? I'll just put a style in here. And I can do multiple of these. I don't have to, I'm not limited just to, I mean, what I'm doing here doesn't make much sense, but I can do that, right? So I can have one or more style tags in or 0, 1, or many style tags in a document. The order of these things does matter. These styles will get applied, then these styles will get applied, then this one, then this one, then this one, in that order. Okay. So that's good. I just want to make sure we kind of, I did glaze over it quickly, so I want to make sure we had a chance to talk about that. Okay, let me finish it off by saying I've got some resources here. I'd like maybe just definitely, if you're not going to read the whole notes, at least this section here, because like I said, I can't teach you CSS today, so I need to show you good resources to learn CSS. One of them is obviously the assignments you're going to be working on today. These are my resources, the ones I use. And nowadays, Flexbox is a great alternative to what we just did today. We can go and look at a site like Can I Use. If you're not sure about these things, you can go to caniuse.com, and I put Flexbox in here, and I can see that Flexbox is pretty well supported amongst modern browsers. IE11, no support. So if I'm deploying for, again, those government entities that won't upgrade their Windows 7 machines or whatever, this is the situation we're in right now. Other than this, Flexbox is in a great position. And, you know, all these browsers here, Firefox, Chrome, Safari, Opera, and even the mobile versions of those all support this feature now. And if I look up CSS Grid, we can see that it is also getting actually pretty well supported. It's actually surprising to me that there's some partial support in IE11, but it looks like that partial support is with a prefix, so it's like this this weird Microsoft thing that you actually have to add this prefix -ms. You see that sometimes -webkit is it Mozilla? I don't even know, because these days when I write my CSS, I use auto prefixers, and what it'll do is I write this tag. I use this tag here, grid, and it will automatically put the prefixes in for me before it gets sent out to the user, so I don't necessarily think about some of these things. We don't have to worry about that. You're working only in Chrome. But if you see something like that, the prefixes, they do exist. -webkit is a popular prefix for some features. Okay. Yeah, check out Can I Use. And up here, you're going to get like a representation of kind of global usage of or availability of that feature. Whereas so this one was like 88.96%, and Flexbox is 94%, 95% almost. Okay. Thanks, everyone.